This is Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe, the podcast where successful people share what they do to thrive under pressure. Hello again. You're listening to Series 3, Episode 2 of Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, founder of Coaching Impact and author of The Shed Method. And as you know in this podcast, I'm trying to get under the skin of that thing we call pressure. What does it do to us? How can we harness it and make it work for us instead of against us? Whatever life throws at us, work pressures, health pressures, the pressure of competition, relationships, we all experience pressure. What I want to find out is how can we choose to thrive when the stakes are high? Now, I'm not great with metrics, so someone who actively uses metrics to help them deal with pressure, I find pretty intriguing. My guest today, Richard Medcalf, did just that to steer his way into the hallowed halls of Oxford University, out the other end and into the world of consulting. What I want to understand is how his relationship with business pressure was shaped by his relationship with his severely mentally and physically disabled sister. What can we learn from that kind of family tie?
That was the pressure to really, be there for somebody, right, when they needed you. Now, when I look back at that whole period of my life with my, beloved sister who sadly passed away a few years ago, but, she was such an inspiration for me because I had the same DNA as her, yet a slightly different hand was dealt to me. And I had this amazing opportunity in my life to do all these incredible things and move countries and have all these great opportunities and friends and family and kids of my own. And so I do have that real conviction that, if the world's top leaders who've got all these advantages can't make the world a better place, then who can and who should? And that's what drives me to do what I do.
Richard found himself on a relatively smooth academic path through school and university before becoming the youngest ever partner at a top strategy firm. After over a decade in an elite strategic team at tech giant Cisco, he took the strategic decision to found his own company, Xquadrant, and set himself the mission of helping the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs become world-changing forces for good. Over 25 years of strategic know-how have made him excellently placed to write his book, Making Time for Strategy. And I'm delighted that today he's making time for us. In our conversation, we discussed what his life with his sister taught him, how much he values bringing humour into business, and thankfully, he won't be sharing his Freddie Mercury impression. Richard, thank you so much for joining me on Better Under Pressure.
Sara, I'm so looking forward. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, well, let's start with you. When do you remember first feeling pressure, or at least identifying it as pressure for yourself?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this question. I realized in my childhood, not so much. I think I kind of glided through school and academia pretty well. And then, but probably when I went to Oxford University, obviously the standards were really high. And I think revising in my first year for my first year exams, it felt so much to me at the time that I literally baptized the mug that I used as my revising mug and then decided to get rid of it after the exams. It had so many bad memories of revising that I actually threw away my mug. So that's probably the first time I felt pressure.
It meant so much to you. What was was that a positive pressure or was it not?
I think on one level I rose to the occasion. I did well. And so it was positive in the sense that I did knuckle down and put in the work that I kind of needed to do to get the result I wanted. But I think there did come quite a lot of anxiety with that, right? Because already at that age, I suppose, without realizing it, I'd started to realize that I could perhaps find my identity in my performance and that being good academically was my thing, right? I was lousy at sport. I was a kind of a guitarist, but wouldn't say I was a musician. So traditionally, I'd never been very good at music in my early childhood. So I didn't really consider myself a musician or a sports person. So academic at that age. You know, it's probably the only thing you have left, or perhaps friends and social, but I wasn't necessarily in the crowd either. Yeah, perhaps there was a sense of, can I actually deliver on this avenue that I've chosen to perform?
Yeah, and interesting that you've tied in your performance to your identity at that point.
Yeah, obviously at the time I didn't think of it in that way, but I think looking back, it's part of a trend that I saw at university, and then when I went into consulting, and you get all the numbers, every month, how many fees you billed, how much sales were, and literally where you ranked on all of those metrics amongst sort of your peer group. And so again, that I found quite fun, because I managed to figure out how to kind of game the system as a strategist, not by cheating, but by like figuring out which levers to pull, right? Has always been a speciality of mine. So
right.
When it was going well, I really enjoyed that game. And of course, what I started to realize was when it didn't go so well for whatever reason, I didn't feel great.
So did you have a very clear sense of when the pressure raised your performance, and it was, you use the word game, fun, sort of cracked into the system to make the most of it, and when actually the pressure did the reverse to that? Or were you always very conscious of that barometer and keeping it in the sort of raising performance bucket?
Yeah, I think actually, first part of my life, actually, it was generally a positive thing. I think it was generally a positive thing. I definitely enjoyed having a number, to kind of follow. And that has a lot of benefit to start with, that kind of metric-based performance, because there is a game you are playing, and when you're winning, and if you are winning, it feels good, right? So I think for the first part of my career, it did. I think when I became partner in that strategy company, I was the youngest ever partner, and at that point, suddenly it was like, the game's different now, because there's nowhere else to go. What there is just like almost stretching out into infinity, year after year of, or quarter after quarter of hitting my numbers, delivering, not messing up, right? Not having a big hole in my performance, all that stuff. And that didn't feel that it was going anywhere, right? Suddenly it was just, I'm on this hamster wheel now.
Right.
And that's, I think, where I suddenly went, whoa, do I want to do something else with my life? Do I need to change jobs, change careers? Because I felt I'd got to the end and I was just focused with more of the same.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing in there is that, well, first of all, that numbers and metrics and measurement is key for you in terms of managing pressure, that actually you can see some incremental progress on the journey of pressure.
Yes. I mean, I think what was interesting about those numbers, and probably less so in that academic setting, because the number came at the very end, right? So that wasn't helpful then. It was a lag indicator, because you did your exams and then you got the grade. What was good in the consulting world was it was every month you got immediate feedback. And so I find that kind of immediate feedback, when it was going well, was great pressure, right? I think if it was just a 5-year goal that I was aiming towards, I would have found that harder to maintain at that age.
So how do you do that now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think I've moved away from this kind of metrics-based pressure. I've really tried to, at least. But again, when I set up my own business, as you know, after about 10 years in the tech industry, after consulting, I then set up my own business in the consulting and coaching space. And for a while, I kind of went back to the metric pressure. So it was like, what I love doing is helping leaders with exponential impact, right? 10xing their valuation or some other key metric that's important, and something that's really actually more than just the finance. They want to help them change the world in a way, and I'm really serious about that. And so I kind of felt, well, if I'm helping my clients create these exponential results, I'm a fraud if I don't exponentially grow my business every single quarter, right? Because how could I possibly tell my clients how to do that if I'm not doing it for myself? Of course, what that creates is, if that's like an unlimited, unbounded, and forever objective, it's like a real rod for your back, right? It can make life misery. I think it did for me, because if one quarter it was slightly down from the previous quarter, I was like, oh, I'm a fraud, I'm a loser. How dare I have this positioning in the market? And And I realized that my kind of overall mood was very much dependent on how I was doing compared with this metric that I had randomly set for myself.
Yeah.
And I think I've kind of started to really reframe it in terms of, well, everyone knows that when you go for huge breakthrough goals, the journey is messy. It's the whole point. Like, if you want incremental progress, then you can probably have it, but it's a different game from exponential progress, and which often can be like stagnation and then a breakthrough and then going down and then going back up and so forth. So I kind of learned to let go a bit of that kind of regular, consistent metric pressure, and instead really focus on my mission and say, like, how can I judge my day as being a success, right? And how can I celebrate? Oh, today, I had a powerful conversation with this person. I helped this client get their breakthrough over here. I created some intellectual property, which I know is really going to land with my people, or whatever it is. And so I've tried to break it back down and give myself mini games that I can win when I look back at the day that I've had.
And how is that when you change the game from something that is quantifiable in the sense like a figure or a metric versus what you're now seem to be doing, which is, well, it sounds to me like it's more around widening your ability to see what progress can feel like and can sound like. How is that? Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think in a way we're both often working with clients who have the pressure of numbers very, very firmly on their back, particularly at the moment. And how do you train yourself to respond to a different sort of game in a way? How did you do that?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example of a client actually I spoke to this week, because actually his journey parallels my own in some ways. So what he did, he came to me on the call. Now, he's an entrepreneur who's extremely successful. He's built $100 million business from scratch over the last couple of decades, and he's scaling it to $1 billion. And I'm working with him on that. And he's incredible person. He's got world leaders on speed dial. He's got celebrities that he hangs out with. He's created his own global forum. Really amazing individual. And when I spoke to him, he was in a bad place. He said, I can't remember how he started the conversation, but it was something like, I need a therapist, not a coach right now, or something like that. He felt really bad. And we dug into it. And without going into obviously all the details, he had some real people problems in his business that had left him feeling a bit betrayed, a bit isolated, a bit of drained his confidence in many ways. And yet what I know about him is he's on his exponential mission that's far bigger than the problems he's experiencing right now. But from his perspective, sales are down. He's lost a couple of key members. He's having to kind of get back into sorting things out. And I caught him because the way he was describing the current, the last 4 or 5 months in the year, was the way he was describing it was draining me of energy, and obviously draining him of energy, because it was all the reasons why he wasn't the leader he thought he was, why he wasn't the manager and the executor that he thought he was, and all the rest of it. And I realized I can do the same thing. That's to say, I can, there's actually huge progress potentially, not necessarily always in the final number, but real, things are getting implemented, foundations are being laid, big shifts, or even real results. I've signed up an amazing new client or whatever, but I often don't see those things because the high performer in me is like, yeah, but Richard, you could be further ahead by now, or why are you still struggling with this issue, or whatever it is. And I can be in the phase where I just see all those things where there's the gap between where I want to be and where I am. And the problem is with that is, like my client, that drains me of energy. When we stopped, we just took, it was under an hour, and we just looked at the different things he was saying. I was like, is that really true? And what about if this is true? And we kind of reframed it. And he realized that it wasn't that he wasn't the leader he thought he was. It was just that this year is a year where he's really remaking his entire leadership to be at the next level. Because running $1 billion business is very different from running a 100 million business. That he thought he was a bad judge of people. But actually, when we dug down, he had a suspicion about one of these people 10 years before that he never quite followed through on. So actually, he's a better judge of people that he knows. He's just got to listen to his intuition more. There are a few other things that we looked at. But my point is that it's the same story, but we need to be paying. It's the same past, right? But the way we look at the past really determines how we respond to the pressure in the moment. Because are we seeing it as part of an upward trajectory where we're actually building on things that happened that are setting us up for success in the future? Or are we looking at it as, oh my God, all the things that have gone wrong, all the things that are not there. And actually we feel like we're on a downward slope, even if actually the reverse is the case. So that's a bit of a long answer, but I think it's quite vivid in terms of kind of how the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. And, I love the phrase, our energy flows where our attention goes, and the discipline in a way that it takes for us, particularly in moments of pressure, to choose the story that is most energizing for us to be able to continue and believe that we can keep making progress despite the things that our brain is naturally gravitating towards to alarm us, to alert us, to ultimately protect us. But it just doesn't feel like that at the time, does it? It just feels like a huge drain on one's capacity to manage this sort of uncertainty or volatility. So yeah, I really, really like that. And I'm interested, Richard, as to, I'm an owner of a business as well. How do you build the discipline to remember to do that? To actually notice, oh my God, that's that story that's coming in, and actually it's draining and it's not necessarily the truth. How do what's the discipline involved in that for you personally?
Yeah. So I've actually been doing something, a weekly reflection. So I used to ask myself, things about the week, what's gone well, what's not gone well. But I actually ask myself a different question now, which is like, how is this week setting me up for more success than ever before? Because what it actually does is it points to new ground that you've broken. And I have a technique I use with my clients called the stepping stone method, which is actually that sometimes it's great to set visions and goals. I love all that stuff. When you have really big goals, we come up with plans to get us into action, but we're never quite sure where we can actually get to, because the pathway is unclear. And actually, at any one step, what is available to us is the next stepping stone from where we currently are, right? So let's say you now have a successful podcast. So that's a stepping stone you've never had before, right? If you go back 3 years, you didn't have that. But the fact you have the podcast now allows you to step somewhere else that you couldn't have got to 2 years ago, because you had to have this stepping stone in place. And perhaps the opportunity that it opens up, you couldn't have even imagined 2 years ago. It's like, to have computers, you had to have vacuum tubes, right? Because the first computers were built with vacuum tubes, but nobody was inventing the vacuum tube because they wanted to build a computer, right? So often it's like, we don't know where the next step's going to be. We can't see what's beyond the horizon, but we take the step and then we have a look and, oh my word, I built a vacuum tube. Now I can build a computer and I can take the next step. And so that question of saying, how is what happened last week or last month setting me up for unparalleled success in the future? Like, how is that making it easier for me to do what I really want to do? It allows us to look and go, oh my word, I've just stepped onto a new stepping stone. I've got this new client. I've sold the 10x bigger deal than I've ever sold before. I've built this amazing relationship with this famous person. Well, I don't know, whatever it is. You can go, oh, that's amazing. And then suddenly it gives us excitement because we can see a new stepping stone that wasn't available before. So that's probably how I
and it also forces us, doesn't it, to counter that natural tendency to notice all the gaps and to notice what's missing and, the default. It's a very clear way of directing attention by that question. It actually reminds me of someone. I remember years ago, I was coaching someone. When I arrived, he was really flustered, and he said, "Oh, Sara, I nearly cancelled you. You know, I haven't got down. I haven't done anything yet with my day. It's just, you know, there's so much I need to do." So I remember saying to him, "Oh, tell me what you've done then with your day so far." And he said, "Oh, I've literally arrived and then went through the open plan office and got stopped by 2 or 3 people. And I just got into conversations with 2 or 3 people. So, you know, I didn't get to my desk till at least an hour after I'd entered the building." I said, "Great. What have you done for all of those 3 people that you've connected with?" And then suddenly he started to realize that it hadn't been a complete waste of time at all. He was a leader. His presence had made a difference to 3 people on the way to his office. And I remember it because it was a real moment that made him realize just what his default mechanism was in terms of what achievement actually, how he was construing and describing achievement and progress to himself.
What we're talking about here is the impact of what we choose to focus on, especially when our plans aren't going well. This plays such a crucial role in how we can increase or decrease feelings of pressure. And it can very quickly, without us even knowing actually, affect our mood. How often do we finish a day highlighting what we didn't get done, or the conversations that could have been better, or the results we didn't achieve? We know we do this because we're wired to look out for what's likely to go wrong or to remember what didn't work in the past. Because of that, we have to train ourselves to highlight all the things, the little wins, however small, that give us the most energy, that actively point us towards the metrics, to use Richard's phrase, that matter most to us. That kind of shift is by no means easy or natural. It requires discipline. Richard's spoken a lot about the power of metrics. So continuing on that theme, we have to be really clear about our own metrics. Which ones constitute a successful day for us? We shouldn't leave it to chance, because if we do, that's when other people's metrics can take control of our judgment of what has actually made our day successful or not. It has to be our choice. I want to emphasise here, though, that focusing on what hasn't gone well for some can be incredibly motivating to set the next day or the next week up for success. Not for me, though. Here's a reminder of a couple of Richard's questions that can help us stay in control. Firstly, ask yourself, how am I judging that a day's been a success? I think it's important to write down a few metrics for ourselves. For example, I think one of mine might be, have I laughed enough today? Secondly, ask yourself, how is what happened last week setting me up for success this week? I really like how Richard puts this. It actively pushes us to join the dots of what's possible. The language forces us to think about what is possible, and it shows us, as he puts it, the next stepping stone. Anyway, back to Richard.
In leadership, especially top leadership, this is what people don't see, right? I know you see it because you work with very high level leaders as well, but it's this like the emotional roller coaster that can be going on of business is great, it's terrible, this is working, this is terrible, things not happening, etc., etc. And people don't see it. And I often find one of my roles is to ignite, my clients, ignite them to step up back into the vision of themselves and their legacy and what they want to achieve in their work in the world, and be the person they know they can be, and to remind them to be that person. And I know I need to ignite them. That's why I do it, because I know I need to ignite myself.
Yeah, of course.
Because it could be the same as well.
Yeah.
You wake up, it's a Monday morning, you might not be feeling it, right? You might not have had and yet somehow it's like, okay, let me remember what all this is about, why I've chosen to do this work.
Yeah, which is a practice.
It's important. Yeah, and it's a practice and it's a discipline. And in fact, I've always had a slight thing. So when I have a shower in the morning, I realize we always have a question that is in our minds pretty much all the time. I think in life, we have like a default lens that we're looking through the world at. I think my question is like, what's fun and interesting, or what's fun and exciting? And I found actually, as I step into the shower, I often ask myself, what's fun and exciting? Yeah. And I thought it was a bit of a flippant, not very serious thing to be asking myself. I could be asking myself other things, where's the biggest revenue opportunity or something, right? Or I didn't do that. What's fun and exciting? But I do actually think it serves me because it helps ignite me, helps me find the stepping stones, helps me do that. But I realized to be even more intentional about that and to remember that the past is a tool to energize the present, or it's a tool to drain us of energy in the present, right? We have to create the past. Some people, they've had terrible experiences as a child and it floors them for life. They never recover. Other people have the same experiences and it galvanizes them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of my clients became a multiple times CEO, ran huge businesses, reported at one point into the CEO of Cisco, which is a Fortune 50 company, all the rest of it. His father died when he was young, and he chose to interpret that in a way of, okay, I need to step up because the world's an uncertain place.
Yeah.
But other people could have taken that very, very differently.
Yeah.
So the future is the past is how we interpret it at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's always a choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Always a choice. And I think, in my world, knowing that I have enough fuel in my tank to make that choice is incredibly important, hence the shed. I'm always looking to look at, to sort of assess, has this person in front of me now got enough fuel in their tank to actually activate that choice? And often they don't. They think they have, but they don't have. And I say that to myself as well. Often I feel I can get easily drawn into the pull of more to do when I don't have the fuel to achieve it, actually. So those sort of sense of understanding what your conditions for success are is so important. And, you mentioned humor. Ever since I've known you, Richard, that's a huge value of yours, humor. So I can imagine having a shower in the morning and reminding yourself of what's fun is absolutely tapping into that, right?
Yeah. It's when I talk with my clients, I talk about being strategic and being magnetic, and most people kind of gravitate to one, but a lot of people, they gravitate towards being strategic. They have a plan, and what they think is they need a better plan, or they need to be more disciplined about their plan. And yet being magnetic is that quality of when we win somebody over in that conversation, or we bring the energy that we need to a creative task to really nail it. And you're right, that is, as you say, it's easy to not do that and just get into productivity and strategy and roll that out. But actually, it's the magic, right, in the magnetism, which is probably going to really impact the results that we get. So one thing I do, I'm a music fan, and I play electric guitar. I have my guitar in my home office. And if I have even just 3 minutes before a call and I'm not feeling inspired, I will do a mini solo on my electric guitar for 2 minutes. And it just gets me into a different frame of mind. It gets me out of my head.
Yeah.
Gets me out of the linear thinking, gets me into my body and into intuitive feel, improvising. And suddenly that is the most productive thing I can often do. And yet it feels frivolous. I expect my family, if they're, I work from home very often, and my family think I'm just messing around, right? But it's actually an incredible performance lever.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love the fact that, you've worked out what it is for you. I can remember somebody during COVID, we were doing a virtual call, and for her, it was going out and watering her tomatoes. It actually doesn't matter what it is, as long as you know what it is for you. So Rich, what would you say moving through your life has been one of the worst pressures that you have had to deal with?
There's one which was it the worst? I feel the deepest one really it was in my family. Actually, I think family pressures are often the biggest ones in general. So growing up, my sister was very severely handicapped, disabled, mentally and physically disabled. And, I had a straight A's at school and she had straight zeros, right? She never, she couldn't speak. She didn't, well, she went to a special school, but she does no academic subjects. And so I suppose the biggest pressure actually was that she had epilepsy as part of one of the many things she had. And she would fall over, like she would just have a grand mal seizure. It varied at different points in her life, but there was definitely a phase where she would have 1 or 2 or even 3 of those every single day, which would result in her stopping and freezing and then falling stiff in random direction. If we caught her, then she was safe. And if we didn't catch her, she would smash, either against the carpet or against the wall or whatever. At one point, she smashed it. She fell down onto the TV stand and she smashed her teeth out. At one point, she was falling so much that the back of her head literally started to get soft with the impact. My dad had to improvise. He bought her a cycle helmet, which didn't exist at the time. They were very, very early stage, and that kind of worked. And then she fell forward, and then he had to build like a face guard for her. But until we'd figured out these solutions, there was this pressure of like always just being alert.
Yeah.
Because, and there'd be signs, like at one point she'd just stop, or she would run out the room, which is terrible. She runs away from you. It's like, oh my word, you know what's going on. But then you got to catch up with her, even worse. So I think that was a kind of a pressure which, I don't really talk about it now. It was years ago in the past. But looking back, when you ask me that question, that's really comes to mind, because that was the pressure to really, be there for somebody, right, when they needed you. Now, when I look back at that whole period of my life with my, beloved sister who sadly passed away a few years ago, but, she was such an inspiration for me because, I know what I've been given all these, I had the same DNA as her, yet a slightly different hand was dealt to me. And I had this amazing opportunity in my life to do all these incredible things and move countries and have all these, great opportunities and friends and family and kids of my own. And so I do have that real conviction that, if the world's top leaders who've got all these advantages can't make the world a better place, then who can and who should? And that's what drives me to do what I do. So again, I've kind of taken that childhood experience and I've kind of alchemized it to really drive my own, to be a real part of who I am and what my mission is in the world. But I think, growing up with that going on was tough.
I hear that. And also I hear a real essence of spirit in there for you as well. So, on one hand, we're talking about the sort of the discipline of like changing your story and making sure that, you're owning how you're choosing to relate to your past. What I'm hearing in here is a real source of inspiration for you through your sister in terms of her determination when she was dealt a very different hand from you.
Yeah, I think determination, again, it puts everything in perspective, right? We're having we're not hitting some number that somebody has given us or we've given ourselves, and we get all stressed and out by it, right? And then it's worth thinking what real pressure, relativizing things. My, Georgina, when she was 20, she had an operation that went a little bit wrong, and she was paralyzed from the chest down. And after 3 days, she wasn't to be found in a hospital bed. And everyone was like, hang on, because she's in a special hospital. How can she not be in her bed? She's paralyzed from the chest down. And they found her hauling herself down the corridor using just her arms, with her body dragging behind. And there's like such a determination. Like, who does that? So for me, when I talked about being magnetic with my clients, I often describe it as being determined, joyful, and affectionate. And I think those are the 3 words that came from my sister. There's more to it, but those for me really resonate because I can see that in her. And she had nothing, right? She was not productive in any way. She had no kind of economic value, to deliver. She had a lot of things stacked against her, but in all that, she was able to be joyful and make friends by force of who she was and her personality. And I think if we forget all that in our endless goal chasing and achievement mentality, we really lose something precious.
Thank you, Richard. That's really, that's such a lovely balance between the things that you've described in terms of where you sit with pressure. Really helpful. and really helpful to remind all of us, actually, that when we feel we're under pressure, there's always something that can actually give you a bigger perspective and open up the version of what you're currently really working in. So if there was somebody listening to this podcast, Richard, who wanted to be better under pressure, what would be your 2 pay forwards to them?
Yeah, so I think the first one would be invoke pressure GPT.
Ooh, say more about that.
Well, ChatGPT, at least at the time of recording, has a few kind of ticks that I notice, right? And one of the things that it loves writing things such as, it's not so-and-so, it's something else. This is not a podcast interview, Sarah. This is a gateway to your entire transformation as a leader. It's the kind of thing that ChatGPT will write. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I can see it all over the web now. This is not a program. This is a extraordinary once-in-a-lifetime experience, whatever, right? And so I thought about, well, it's quite helpful perhaps to reframe pressure, right? And so you can say, this isn't pressure. It's a whole new opportunity to do whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because what is pressure, right? Pressure does not exist. I mean, pressure is it exists in physics or chemistry, right? I mean, it's a force divided by area, but the pressure that we feel, it's coming from our minds, right? It's a construct. People have expectations on you. That might be a fact. They might be expecting things. You might have expectations on yourself. That might be a fact. It might be a fact that you get fired if you don't deliver the number. Possibly, probably not, but possibly. But the pressure is, that's invented, right? Because of what we feel is necessary and possible and desirable and what's going to give us what we think we need. So it's just kind of worth remembering that pressure isn't really a thing. It's an interpretation.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely love that. And it actually reminds me, I've just been speaking to Genevieve Shaw. She was saying exactly that. She was sort of talking about good and bad pressure. But for her, she can construct pressure to raise her own performance, but also to raise others' performance. But the way she frames it is a huge energizer. And, the reason I wanted these conversations was I think on the whole, pressure can be a fabulous construct to actually achieve more, grow, feel more alive, see more possibility, all of those things. So this idea of construct a pressure ChatGPT, I think is a wonderful solution to that.
Well, because you think about it, if it's not, for example, what does it mean to be under pressure? It could, I had one client who was a CEO of a $2 billion company. And he said that he actually felt quite anxious and pressured when he was speaking to his workforce, all these thousands of people. And we explored that. And I said, well, what's the real feeling? I had this stuff in my stomach and adrenaline and everything. And I said, okay, I know you're a great skier. What's it like when you ski a black run? He says, oh, love it. Yeah, it's brilliant. But what's the feeling? Oh, it's kind of the same.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so what you're saying is this is your black run feeling that you're just experiencing because the game's on. Oh, yeah. Oh, cool. And he was fine with it after that because he had reframed it of, I'm all anxious to, oh, no, it's my black run moment.
Yeah.
I need to be on my game. It's different. So, this isn't pressure. It's my black run moment. Or this isn't pressure. It's a game. Like games, there are stakes that, you have, you might win the game, you might not win the game. But, is it when, if you're playing, well, perhaps Monopoly, it is pressure. But most of the board games, if you're playing Settlers of Catan or I don't know, some game, is it pressure? Do you know what I mean? Is it possibly not? It's a bit of fun. Or if you're playing basketball, is it pressure? Well, yeah, on one level, but it's also fun. So I think, yeah. So the first thing I would say is really use pressure GPT. In other words, this isn't pressure; it's something else, and see what works better for you. And I think the other one would be zoom in and zoom out. So sometimes we have pressure because one of two things, right? Either we've actually we've lost the big picture. We're just in our little thing. And zooming out allows us to go, you know what? This is this tiny little thing. I'm not going to remember it tomorrow or next week. And in the big scope of my life, it's okay. I can get to it. I can do my best, but it's okay. I don't need to have the negative stress associated. The other one is to zoom in, because often we get pressured when we're not actually sure what the next thing to do is.
Yeah.
Right. So one of my mentors used to say that whenever he said, there's no such thing as being overloaded. It's just under-organized. In other words, whenever he felt overloaded, he would stop and go, okay, like, let's quickly reframe. What are my goals? Like, what am I trying to achieve here? What's important? What needs to be done when? What can I drop? And rebuild, like, what am I going to do in the next, in the next hour, in the next day, and just restructure.
Yeah.
Because there is a thing called the trapezoid of doom, which is, trapezoid is one of these shapes, right? Which is like, it's like a rectangle, but it's bigger at the top than the bottom. So the slides are slanted. And at the top, where it's the longer side, that's expectations. And at the bottom, it's resources. So when expectations are bigger than resources and you have this kind of top-heavy shape, then that's a recipe for stress and frustration and failure, right? Because you can't meet the expectations with the resources that you have. Yeah. And those expectations might well be self-imposed, right? Very often. And so the question is, you have to go, well, what's going to shift? Either I have to increase the resources I have, or I have to reduce the expectations to bring them into alignment. So zooming out, I think it's really important to kind of align the trapezoid.
Love it. Love those metaphors. So good. Thank you, Richard, for a great conversation.
It's been a pleasure. I knew it'd be a fun one, and indeed it's lived up to it. It's been great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.